The national championship is set. Will Clemson have the weapons to beat Alabama? And on Alabama's side, coaching changes, will that affect the Tide? We'll talk about that and more coming up inside the locker room. Starting out this season, the Auburn Tigers had a rough start in the first 2 or 3 games, but they rebounded toward the end of the season and made their way to the Sugar Bowl. But it kind of displayed what had been happening all season for the Auburn Tigers as they were defeated by Oklahoma. Gerhard Mathangani, we welcome you in, and I know that game really was kind of what we saw all season. A lot of injuries. Sean White went out early in the game with a broken arm. John Franklin III injured. Just kind of a display of what we've been seeing.
Yeah, if you want to put the season, Auburn's season in a nutshell, you just put the Sugar Bowl game in, and that had a little bit of everything. It had Cam Petway looking a little bit like Cam Petway. Then you had Sean White injured and then wanting to still play, which we saw that early in the season. Then we saw him being ineffective, just like we saw in the Georgia game. We also saw him effective, especially on that first drive. And then with a terrible situation early on and then late with John Franklin III coming into the game, and then you had Jeremy Johnson coming into the game, and then Auburn's only touchdown in the second half being a jump pass from Kerryon Johnson to a tight end. Just everything that Auburn was about early in the year, and then what they were in the middle of the year when they went on that 5-game winning streak, and then towards the end of the year when they had the tough skids against Georgia and Alabama. You saw all that pan out in that Sugar Bowl game, and then obviously a great performance by the Sooners getting down early and then rallying. And of course, they have two Heisman Trophy finalists in Baker Mayfield and D.D. Westbrook, and they showed why they are the players that they are as well.
If Auburn hadn't had the injuries that they did, what would the game have been like here? Even though, like you mentioned, two Heisman Trophy candidates on the Oklahoma Sooners team. Would this have been a totally different game, or would it have been kind of the same as it was?
I think maybe not totally different. Maybe that's not the way to characterize it, but I do think they would have been more competitive, especially in the second half. They wouldn't have had their defense stay on the field for as long as they did, especially in the second half. But the one thing that got exposed with Auburn this year is when Sean White was hurt, John Franklin III could not do enough in the passing game to make anybody fear the passing game. So you just load the box, force you to beat him with his arms. I think he had one completion for under 5 yards. And then you put Jeremy Johnson in the game, and we've diagnosed and documented the struggles of Jeremy Johnson for the last 2 years. Really going back to last year, the beginning of the season, not the 2016 season, 2015 season, against Louisville in that very first game. And he threw 3 interceptions in the first half, and I think the confidence has gone downhill ever since then. And they've tried and tried in so many different ways to put him back into the game plan. He wasn't there. So again, as soon as Sean White got hurt, the wheels came off for the Auburn Tigers, both in this game but also across the season.
Besides quarterback play, because we know Auburn's going to be working on that. They have one coming in. We'll talk about him later. But what's something else the Tigers are going to work towards here in the spring for next season?
Well, they really have to be able to revamp that defensive line because by all indication, Carl Lawson will go to the NFL draft. And really the two cogs of that defense have been Montravius Adams, who's gone, Carl Lawson, who's gone. That defensive line was really kind of what helped out and bailed out the secondary. The linebackers have been pretty strong, and most of them will return. They'll have to get some help back there in that secondary. The defense, though, the season doesn't rely necessarily on the defense. You can't have your defense win you defense wins championships in a certain extent, but they can't win championships when they're on the field all the time.
Right.
You also have to score. So the biggest thing is they have to find a more reliable weapon than just using that one guy. Because I think one of the things in the Gus Malzahn offense that has really hurt them, if you look back over the past however many years, maybe 5 years or 2010 when he was the coordinator, these 4 years as head coach, his offense always needed that one key guy, the main piece of the puzzle. And whether that guy was Peyton Barber, whether that guy was Trey Mason, Cam Newton, if he doesn't have that guy, then the offense seems to sputter. This year, they didn't have that guy at the beginning of the season, found it in Cam Petway. You saw what they did with Cam Petway literally the moment Cam Petway was not available to play anymore, take a look at the offense since then. They went from the top 5 in the nation in rushing down to the bottom of the barrel. So they have to find more than one player to do it offensively, which is a bit of a departure from what they have been doing over the last few years.
Well, here is Coach Gus Malzahn following the Sugar Bowl on Monday night.
I think the key to the game was the third quarter. I mean, that's when they distanced themselves from us. Offense had some 3 and outs. Their offense had a couple, big drives. But overall, like I said, very tough loss. I'm proud of our seniors. We got a bunch of guys back. We got a bunch of young guys that'll learn from this experience, and the future's bright in that locker room.
The Tide will roll on to the national championship Monday night after a big 24-7 win over the Washington Huskies. And Gerhard, a lot of people talking should Washington be in this. They put up a good first half against Alabama, but of course the Tide doing what they do and dominating the second half.
Just like Auburn, Washington came out with a great first drive, put a touchdown on the board. They looked confident. They looked good. They looked really they look like they belong. I'll put it in those terms in the first half. And I'm not saying that they don't belong, and I don't think that and other people want to put other teams in there, maybe like a Michigan or somebody else would have given Alabama a better game. I mean, that's a lot of hypotheticals. I really think that what Alabama has proven over the course of the season and in that game was once the defense settles down, because everybody plays off emotion early. Where Alabama kills you is they're like a python. They just they start to constrict you, and then they constrict so much to where you can't breathe, and that's what they were able to do, stifle Washington's attack. And for whatever reasons, I'm not sure why, they didn't open up the passing game. The Huskies did not. And if you try to run on a team like Alabama, that's hard enough as it is. And especially if you're not going downfield and trying to pass against them, well, then they got you exactly where they want you. And so they opened the game up a lot slower than what they normally do. And you can credit Washington's defense for that. The Huskies came in, they were one of the top teams as far as takeover ratio in the country, and Alabama didn't turn it over, played a much more conservative game plan by their own measures, but that Alabama defense really showed why they're the class of college football right now. Is they were able to settle in after that first drive, and even though the Huskies felt that they were in it, the Bama defense made sure to demoralize them and make sure that, hey, you aren't in it as you think you are.
Well, here's Coach Nick Saban following the game on New Year's Eve.
We knew this would be a tough game. I think when you get to this point in the season, especially when you have this much time between games, it's a little bit like running a marathon, which you get at the 20-mile mark, and you still feel like you're only halfway there. But we got more miles to go, and these guys are very committed to it, and they worked hard over the holiday and made a lot of sacrifices, and I was really proud of the way we competed. We knew it would be a tough game out there. They've got a really good defensive team. I think our defense did a really good job against their explosive, big play receivers and offense that they have. And I was just really pleased with the way we played together as a team.
Well, after Clemson's shutout against Ohio State, the rematch is set between Alabama and Clemson for the national championship Monday night. It was a championship for the ages last year when we saw this game. In your opinion, what's it going to be like this year?
I think it won't be as good as last year. I think that it has the potential to be a good game. I don't think that it will be as good, mainly because I think that both teams have been here before. But I think that Alabama comes into this game a little bit stronger. And yes, Clemson up and down really all season long. And I just don't see the same team that struggled with Troy, struggled with Pittsburgh, struggled against North Carolina State. Something doesn't tell me that you can just subtly turn it on and turn it off like you have been in the past. And I think Alabama's just playing better football right now, and they're a better team than the team last year that won it. Part of the reason why last year's game was so good is that they went head for head, toe to toe, blow for blow, and then it took some really, really strong judgment calls from Nick Saban in order to kind of turn that game around. I don't think that it takes the same thing this time around. I think Bama comes in as a much stronger team.
Well, it'll be a fun one to watch. That game is at 7 p.m. Monday night on ESPN. Of course, next week we'll have a full recap from the national championship. Well, we're going to grab a timeout here. When we come back, we'll talk some college basketball. Stay with us here in the locker room. Back here inside the locker room, we get caught up in all this college football talk. We forget college hoops is going on and conference play getting underway. Most teams have started some conference play, including the Alabama Crimson Tide. They got a win over Mississippi State in their first conference game this week.
Yeah, and it's been pretty big. I think that the one thing for Alabama is after a very, very subpar, maybe even a below par non-conference schedule, you need to come out and look really good, especially in the conference games early on in the season, to give yourself some confidence and give yourself some momentum as you go into league play. One of the things about this Crimson Tide basketball team is that they return a lot of guys who did not play last year. Dazon Ingram being one of the guys that was hurt last year. He's now back in the fold. I think Avery Johnson said there's like 4 or 5 guys that they played at the beginning or at the end. They never played with each other all year long. And so there's a lot of chemistry things that needs to improve with Alabama. And I think that they'll get it and they'll get it settled in. But if they want to get another berth into the dance, and another being they were there, a while back. Last year they were a bubble team. If they want to get themselves back into a position where they can get back into the big dance, they need to look good in conference play because their non-conference schedule was not very good.
They lost to Texas, Clemson, Dayton, teams like that that you would think a team like that could beat. What's the difference in the conference teams you're going to be seeing and those type teams that they've played?
Well, a lot of the teams, especially in the conference, they saw what Alabama was last year, so they were not going to pull a surprise on anybody. I think one of the things about Alabama last year is you just didn't know what to expect with Avery Johnson. Going into another year, you didn't know what to expect with these freshmen that he signed. Had a really good class. There's a lot of good positive momentum going on with Alabama basketball. Now people expect Alabama basketball to be a contender, not necessarily Kentucky, but just to be a contender. And so they're not going to surprise anybody. They'll get their best effort. So now with that being said, this year going into conference with a below non-conference slate early in October, November, and December, they need to really make sure January and February are filled with good momentum. Positive momentum rolling against teams that know them well. And not like teams against Oregon or Texas, teams that you mentioned earlier that they've played that, you'll play a home this year and a home next year and you don't have as much tape on them and you don't really know them as much as an opponent. These SEC teams now know each other well enough to where you have to make the adjustments and have to know that the way teams are going to attack you this time around.
The Auburn Tigers also starting conference play with a loss, though, as they took the loss to the Georgia Bulldogs. What's Bruce Pearl got going on down in the Plains?
It's almost complete opposite of Alabama. They had a really strong non-conference schedule, won about 10 games in the non-conference, and then now they go into conference play and stumble their foot early against the Georgia Bulldogs. And that Georgia's a team that I don't think will go very far. I mean, they might surprise me, but I mean, according to what they've done in the past couple of years, I don't expect them to make the strongest run. Auburn right now, meanwhile, they're in a position where they want to get to the dance. They want to get to the next level, and they've started out really well in their non-conference action. I think for Auburn right now, they're one of the leading three-point shooting teams in America. They have to keep that going because Austin Wiley, who's a freshman, who's the new guy, so to speak, was playing high school basketball not even 6 to 8 months ago. He will need to slowly get mixed into this fold and be the key guy down on the post. Their shooters need to keep him in it. But you know as well as anybody, a team that can shoot themselves into games can shoot themselves out of games. So you can't be super dependent on your three-point shot, but it needs to be reliable.
Another one of those teams that is having a good season so far, and that is the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. They sit at 9-7 on the season, 2-0 in OVC play. And the OVC is good at basketball. We see Jacksonville State dominating football, not a good football conference. You move to basketball, and they're a good basketball conference.
Very good basketball conference. As much as where you see teams like Murray State, you see teams like Belmont, even as not your conference tournament champions, make a run. You see all the ESPN pundits and all the CBS pundits, all the pundits from all these places say, hey, look, this team is on the bubble, deserves to be in. So Jacksonville State's competing with teams in a league that win 20, 24, 25 games a season. Jacksonville State can't really expect that year one, but they're doing a great job under first-year head coach Ray Harper. And one of the biggest things with this team is chemistry because they had to get used to each other really early. Because this is a different team than what James Green had a year ago. They had Nobert Giga, who won the OVC Newcomer of the Week. Is a guy that he was in the fold late. Really started practicing like 2 or 3 weeks before the game, and before their first game, before they opened up the season. And so they're still ironing out these details. And for them to already have 9 wins and 2 wins in conference is really big for them moving forward. Like you said, strong basketball league. So to have this start with a new head coach and a lot of new young pieces, it's really exciting for the Gamecocks.
What does that say about Coach Ray Harper, taking a program who a few years ago only had 4 or 5 wins to already 2-0 in conference play.
Well, it says a lot about him, and it says a lot about the way that he's able to prepare, because one of the things he talks about a lot whenever he meets with the media is he wants his guys to know how to prepare to play good basketball and against good basketball leagues. He's been all over the place. He's been in Division I, he's been in Division II, he's won wherever he's been, and so he understands where the expectations of the program need to be, and I think that's the biggest thing. Don't come in with too lofty expectations, but also don't come in hurting yourself with beliefs that aren't necessarily true. And I think that's where he sits right now. He has a pretty good understanding of where they are, the league they play in, and what they need to do to continue to get better. What that looks like on the scoreboard and on the record sheet will let it solve itself out, but make sure first you play good basketball, and that's exactly what they're doing.
We'll keep you updated with all this college basketball as that is where our attention will be turning to coming up starting next week, as college football will be over. On a high school basketball note, coming up next week, we'll have a full preview of the Calhoun County basketball tournament. They're seeding this week, and we'll talk about that coming up on next week's show. We're going to take another time out. When we come back, we'll talk some more college football, so stay with us inside the locker room. Back here inside the locker room, and it's time to talk some more college football here in our locker room roundtable. You know, the big news this week has been Lane Kiffin is out as offensive coordinator at Alabama. What is this going to do for the Tide in the national championship?
Well, I think it's easy to do the Chicken Little, skies falling kind of thing. I don't think that's the case. I think that this team is so dialed in and so locked in, and the guy that they have replacing him, Steve Sarkisian, is a guy that's been on the staff not just this year but last year as well. So he now knows everything that goes on into this program, what Nick Saban wants, and how to diagram it. He's been in the meetings. I think that there's going to be so much of a congruent and consistent approach to every practice from here to the national championship game. I don't think that the terminology will change as much. I don't think that the concepts will change as much. I think that if you could have a seamless transition, this will be as seamless as possible. Now, would it hurt? Let's just say he took this job and all this happened right before the SEC championship game, after the Iron Bowl. I think that point of the season, there's enough of a ripple to create a little bit of panic. But this far into the season, with one game to play, with 4 quarters to win another national championship and go back-to-back, with the guy who's taking over for Lane Kiffin being in the system for the last 17, 18 months, I just think that this Alabama's such a machine, I feel like, that it's almost plug-and-play as far as players go. But I think it's almost the same thing as far as coaches go, especially when you have a guy like Steve Sarkisian, who a lot of people are a little bit more excited about than Lane Kiffin. And I think that he's been in this program and this system for so long. It gives a lot of credit. Give a lot of credit to Nick Saban for almost laying these bricks and seeing this. Last year, whenever the year before last, whenever USC fired Steve Sarkisian in almost the same form that happened with Lane Kiffin. A lot of personal problems. They fired him in the middle of the year. He says, come to Alabama. Same thing with Sarkisian. I think with Sarkisian now in place for as long as he has been, it almost creates a seamless transition for Alabama.
A lot of people were skeptical that Lane Kiffin was even staying on through the playoffs. Should he have left before the playoffs, or was it good for him to stay this one game?
Kirby Smart once said, and this part sticks with me for a long time, because as accomplished as Kirby Smart is, and as much as he's been through and as much as he knows about the game, he said juggling 2 jobs was the hardest thing he's done in his professional career. And now seeing this with Lane Kiffin, you kind of understand why. You kind of understand that it is difficult to recruit and have meetings and try to set up a program and get up on a strong foot and start spring practice and off season, all that kind of stuff, one level, and then at the same time try to create a game plan so you can win another national championship for a school that you will not be at the next year. There is some difficulty to that. I think that Kirby Smart was able to handle that a little bit better than Lane Kiffin, but I also think that it's hard on anybody, and it's hard on everybody. So it's much better to just be honest about the situation, say that it's tough, and then mutually agree who believes that. I don't think it's mutual, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that everybody got honest with themselves and said that Lane Kiffin probably not the best to do this moving forward. Now, I don't think if they didn't have as well of a trust fall, kind of like a safety net, that safety net being Steve Sarkisian, if the safety net wasn't in place, then it'll be a lot harder. But I think they have a good safety net, so this was a good decision for him to go now.
Staying with coaching in in football. I want to go to the NFL for a second. Chip Kelly fired this week. He was at Oregon for a long time.
Right.
Had a chance he could return to Oregon this year, but stay with the NFL. Was fired this week. Will we see him back in college, or is he going to stay around the NFL?
I think he wants to stay around the NFL, but the thing is who's going to give him a job right now? He's a guy that comes in with such radical changes that a lot of people in NFL circles already didn't believe would work. And this has just become confirmation bias that, yes, it doesn't work. And so people are going to say that it proved itself out at Philly. It proved itself out in San Francisco, going in with a quarterback in Colin Kaepernick, who is seemingly the perfect guy to run his kind of offense. Couldn't happen with Colin Kaepernick. Couldn't happen with Blaine Gabbert. I think that we've gotten to a situation with Chip Kelly where it's going to take a owner and a GM and a front office that believes in him so immensely that they'll say, "Hey, we'll take a chance on you," and say, we'll give you everything, and we'll make the bet on you. Will that happen? I don't know, because like I said, there's a lot of people in NFL circles who already believe that his system doesn't work.
Right.
And then this becomes now, we were right the whole time. I don't know. I think that maybe his best bet is to return to college football, but where a lot of the jobs, like you said, have already closed up, and so we'll see where they go.
And back on the college football field now, when the college football playoff committee came out with the top 4, Ohio State was in it. People were unsure. A lot of people said they shouldn't be in there. After their performance Saturday getting shut out by Clemson, should Ohio State have been in the playoff?
The easy answer is to say no, obviously. The easy answer is to say, they didn't belong. They didn't play for a conference championship. They didn't win their conference championship. They didn't even play in the conference championship game. They didn't win their division. Penn State did. And then they got blown out. See, we were all right. But the people would be saying the exact same thing had you reversed the scores from the Alabama-Washington game, and Washington lost 31-0. Should the Huskies have been in? I think that Ohio State, given their body of work at the course of the season, I think they deserve to be in, and I'm not going to play that now reverse side of They shouldn't have been in just because they lost. I think that they just ran into a better team or played better that day. And I think Ohio State it probably hurt itself by not playing in the Big Ten championship game, because then they had yet another week to get rusty and sit around and whatnot. Penn State, in my opinion, was not a top 4 team. Yes, they won the conference championship. They weren't a top 4 team to me. USC lost too many games. They were probably playing the best football at the time, but they lost too many games in order to get in. And so, yes, I still think that they were the most deserving team. I do think Michigan would have given Clemson a better game, but Michigan lost in the Big House, and Michigan lost at the Horseshoe in the Ohio State-Michigan game. So I just think that, the result is what we got, but I think Ohio State deserved to be in.
Well, staying with college football here, we talked a little bit earlier about the Auburn Tigers quarterback situation. They've picked up Jared Stidham, who is a huge pickup for the Auburn Tigers. What's he going to do for the Tigers coming up for next season?
Number one, hope. There's a lot of people who see this season and they saw exactly how terribly the wheels fell off in this situation. So the first thing he represents is hope. Now he has to go in, and the offensive coaches have to give him something that he can work with in order to make him a better quarterback and make him improve on what we saw at Baylor. We see he's got all of it. We see that he's got the tools to make it happen. He's done it on the Power 5 stage. Now can the coaches come up with something to make him successful in that regime?
Well, he will be a fun player to watch, and looking forward to seeing him next season. Before we get out of here, we have to have our national championship edition of Pick 6, which is only Pick 1, I guess, today. We got the national championship game, Alabama and Clemson. Mickey Shaddricks is going with the Clemson Tigers. Gerhard, who you got?
I battled with this just a little bit, but like I said at the top of the show, I just think Bama's playing so much better football right now. I expect an Alabama 7 to 10 point win.
Deshaun Watson's tough, I know that, but Alabama's defense just so strong like they always are. I've got the Tide rolling on with another national championship here for Coach Nick Saban. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's edition of the show. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.